to focus on Microsoft's success or failure. So this is a shallow reason, but there are people who contribute to our community for this reason, and their contributions are real, even if the reasons are not the wisest reasons. And then another motive that some people have for the free software development that they do is money. Once I stopped selling tapes of GNU Emacs, I had to find another way to make a living. So I began taking commissions to make changes in the free software I had already released. So when I said that you could go to various companies and say, how much will you charge to make this change, that's not just theoretical. I actually made my living that way for many years in the 80s, and there are lots of people doing it today. I stopped because I got a big prize and I didn't have to do it at the time anymore. But otherwise, I would have continued. So the clients who paid me to make changes in free programs, they knew, because I told them, that when it was done, I would put these changes into the standard release and they would become free software. But it was still worthwhile for them to pay me because they wanted that software to exist. And they had no reason to expect anybody to write that particular improvement just for his own wishes. They knew that to get that particular job done, they had to pay someone. And they chose me because I had written the base program, and so they figured I was an expert and I could do a good job and fast. So even though I charged them a lot of money per hour, they figured I would get the job done in fewer hours and that it was a good arrangement. And in fact, my income went up at this point to the extent that I started turning away work some of the time. Once I had made enough money to live on, plus an equal amount to save, plus an equal amount for taxes, I thought, why should I spend any more time working for pay this year? And I was actually making a living with 7 weeks of paid work per year. Of course, this was possible because I was doing unpaid work all the rest of the year, producing free software and improving it, which is why people wanted to use it and wanted to adapt it. But the rest of the work I was doing that for the cause, for the sake of having a free operating system. I would have done it anyway. So money was not my primary motive in working on free software. But it was an important part of my motive for making that particular change that somebody was paying me to make. If they hadn't paid me to make that change, I would have been making some other change which was more useful to more people. Instead, I made the change that was useful to that one particular client. So, as I explained, one action can have multiple motives, and one of the motives for that particular job that I did was money. And nowadays there are lots of people doing free software businesses which often involve, some of the time, extending the free software that's available to the community. You see, if you're thinking of using a non-free program, you have two choices: take it or leave it. If you take it, you get it exactly the way it is, with whatever bugs it has, whatever malicious features or poorly designed features it may have. And the other choice is don't use it. With free software, of course, you have those two alternatives, but you have others in between as well, which are use the program but make changes of various different sizes. So it's like buying a building. You know, if a company buys a building, they can use it exactly the way it is, or they could decide they don't want to buy that building, or in between they have the possibility of buying it but then calling in some carpenters and plumbers and making some change. They could make small changes or big changes. Of course, big changes cost more. Which of these alternatives is best for you in any given situation? It depends. But it's good to have those other options. With free software, it's the same. The business has the option of making changes bigger or smaller, and they can choose among these the option that's best for them. And this creates a large amount of free software business. People sometimes ask how free software might affect employment. Well, the first thing to note is that it won't affect employment very much. Because if you look at all computer-related employment, programming is a small fraction of that. And of that, most of it is developing custom software, software for one client to use internally. A small fraction of it is developing software for release to the public. That's the size of employment that we could imagine perhaps might go away. A small fraction of a small fraction of the computer field. So this employment might perhaps go away, but not necessarily, because a considerable fraction of software development is paid for by governments. And they could just as well decide to make it free software, and it'll still be the same money coming from the same place to produce the same software. There are occasional exceptions. You know, maybe there's some software that goes into a weapon that they don't want to publish at all. But if the software is going to be available to the public somehow, they can make it free software. Meanwhile, switching to free software creates the opportunity for other employment of a new kind. That is, employment adapting software for clients. If a business that wants to, or other organization, government, NGO, whatever, wants to use a program, but they don't choose to use it exactly the way it is, they choose to adapt it, that means they're going to pay somebody to make changes. And that creates new employment. Which one will be bigger, I don't know. Whether switching to free software means, you know, it could mean a little less employment, it could mean a little more, it could mean a lot more, it could mean no change at all. I won't try to predict. What I will say is, it can't mean a big loss of employment. That's impossible, because the jobs that you could imagine might go away are so few compared with the entire computer field. So we don't have anything to worry about as far as the effects on society. And as far as development of software is concerned, we don't need to worry about economic issues in developing software. We've already proved that just by developing so much free software. The whole world has not switched to free software, and already we're developing tremendous amounts. So people who worry about whether free software, the free software community, can provide enough software, that's like worrying whether airplanes could really fly. So, during the 80s, our job, our mission, was to find or develop all the parts we needed for the GNU system. Eventually, when we had a lot of them, we made a list of what was missing. Once that was smaller than a list of what we had, and that was called the GNU task list. We published it and said to people, if you want to help, pick one of these tasks and do it. By the early 90s, we had almost all the components we needed, but there was one major gap. We didn't have a kernel. Now, when you need all of when there are a set of things and you need all of them, a priori, it doesn't matter what order you do them in. You could do them in any order. And that was our situation. So I tried to optimize the order. I was looking for some way we could get either all or part of the kernel from someone else to reduce the job we had to do. And I found out about a microkernel called Mach that was a funded project at Carnegie Mellon University. And then I had the idea that we would use Mach, but Mach didn't do the entire job of the kernel. It did the lower level part. So we would have to write programs to do the other part, and together they would make our kernel. I figured if we only had to do the top level, that would be less work. In addition, we could run those programs as user programs and debug them as user programs, which should make it easier. So I thought that this would enable us to have a working kernel faster and would also give us a more advanced, powerful design. Well, it is a more advanced, powerful design, but it turned out it took years to get it to run. I don't entirely understand why it took so long. I personally was not the one doing it,